Just because Space Marines are widely known as being honourable warriors of more or less noble bearing does not mean they are empathetic to the plight of the average human being. And it most certainly does not mean a Space Marine cannot conduct acts of brutality towards the average Imperial citizen. There are several Space Marine chapters whose deeds towards humanity are so callous, or their appearance so savage, that they do leave us wondering, whose side are they on? We're going to go through a few here now, so do your best to keep up and let me know in the comments what Space Marine chapters you think should be on this list and why. We're going to start with one of the most confronting, darkest practices of any Space Marine chapter, but the second chapter we speak about is, in my opinion, the coolest, so stay tuned. The most savage of recruitment practices belongs to the Death Spectres. It makes sense this chapter descends from the dark and brooding Raven Guard. They were also founded at the same time as the rather unique Exorcist chapter, and they were gifted with the purpose of guarding one of the wildest frontiers of space within the entire galaxy, the Ghoul Stars. This is relevant to our story because honestly, the Death Spectres recruitment traditions are ghoulish in their own right, to the extent that it leaves you wondering whether the nightmare horrors of that region have rubbed off on these noble sons of Corax, or whether they've been drinking too much of the local Kool-Aid. They bear white pale skin they've inherited from their Primarch Corax, as well as glowing red eyes. The Space Marines of the Death Spectres would truly be a terrifying sight for any mere mortal to behold. Through the constant skirmishes with innumerable nightmare creatures in and around the area of space that is the Ghoul Stars, this leaves the Death Spectres wanting for quality recruits to replace their lost battle brothers, and it is their method of recruitment which has earned them a place within this video. You see, the Death Spectres do not draw young male aspirants from sanctioned recruitment worlds. Instead, to ensure only the hardiest of gene stock is implanted with the sacred gene seed of the 19th Legion, the Death Spectres chapter abduct young women of breeding age from a range of worlds away from the more civilized centre of the Imperium's power. Once forcibly taken from their homes, what awaits these abducted women of different cultures and backgrounds is a shared, waking nightmare. Taken to breeding worlds, they are forced to pair with men they do not know, who are themselves slaves or serfs to the chapter, again chosen for their own faultless genetics. In what is thankfully not described too vividly, the captured women are forced to give birth to future generations of the chapter until they themselves outgrow their usefulness, their bodies giving in to the constant birthing regime, or simply outliving their fertile years. Now, there is a lot that occurs within 40k that could be deemed shades of grey, but the Death Spectres recruitment techniques are far and away just unnecessary, and definitely one of the more confronting aspects of 40k lore. Not only is this method of recruitment unnecessary, it's simply torturous and barbaric, to say the least. Being divine angels of the Emperor, whole systems would be screaming for the honour to provide suitably fit recruits. Personally, I think it's a bit much. It's a sci-fi setting, not an episode of SVU. Next up on our list of Space Marines is a bunch who don't necessarily look like a loyalist chapter. In fact, they're so savage, they've made friends with the Space Wolves. The Executioners chapter is my personal favourite, also being the chapter I've chosen to paint my first ever Space Marine miniatures in the colours of. Their culture is very much a reflection of the character of their founder, Fafnir Run, who a lot of you will be familiar with from his appearances in the Horus Heresy novels. He's Sigismund's best mate, Seneschal to the Primarch Rogel Dawn, as well as commander of the Imperial Fist First Assaultator. Quite the high achiever. Two of the most epic moments in 40k lore I can remember involved these guys, which both occurred during the Badab War, which was a massive civil war fought between various Space Marine chapters. If you want to know more about this conflict, leave a comment so I know you're serious and I'll cook it up. Now, firstly, when their Astral Claws and Executioners had defeated a Salamander's force in a void battle, the Executioners, on board to honourably accept the surrender, learnt their Astral Claw allies had snuck onto the same ship to steal the Salamander's gene seed. Infuriated by this act of dishonour, the Executioners boarded their erstwhile allies' vessel before slaughtering every Space Marine, Servitor, and Serf on board. The leader of the Astral Claws, who had led the boarding action, was decapitated and his head presented to the Salamanders, proving there are instances of justice served in the 41st millennium. Another much-loved moment that proves the Executioners are the most badass, brutal chapter. We all know the Carcharodons are so aggressive in close quarters they aren't someone you want to be getting up close and personal with. Well, again during the Badab War, the executioners did just that. Floating in the void was a deathly silent space station, discovered to be filled with the bodies of slain executioners and Carcharodons, neither chapter willing to give in, and so all dying to a man. The Space Marines of both sides were reported to have died with their hands around each other's throats, as well as bearing grievous wounds that would normally be enough to fell a Space Marine outright, but it looked like they'd fought on regardless, assumedly out of pure hatred and devotion to the kill. Truly, this is one of the basest examples of savagery and bloody-minded determination both these chapters are famed for. Now, what has earned the executioners a place on this list isn't the 100-year penitent crusade they were forced to embark upon at the closing of the Badab War. It is in fact their want to decorate their armour in the tattered remains of their foes, such as tanned, stretched skin, peeled from corpses, as well as trophies such as skulls and other various body parts, making them appear a bit more chaotic in their allegiance. To the executioners though, each Marine hailing from a feral, savage world, he strives to earn his place in the chronicles of his chapter's mightiest heroes. Trophies such as especially exotic or powerful weapons, or the skulls of worthy opponents, are kept until the end of a battle to keep a tally of their feats and achievements. Especially valuable trophies are kept for a time, often adorning the Marines' armour. Smelly. Now, for a faction that funnily enough saw a spike in popularity when its 8th edition rules became quite overpowered, we're all familiar with the 40k term, the flesh is weak, but to some Space Marines, humans in general, are too weak to be deemed worth their time or effort. This is especially true in the case of these guys, the Iron Hands. Infamous for their steely, cold personas, the Iron Hands have at times been known throughout the long millennia to treat humans with anything from disregard to outright disdain. Whether they're choosing to not intervene on a planet's behalf during conflict, sardonically noting survivors will be stronger for the experience, or even just plain old not bothering to avoid civilian casualties during open war. They really are pieces of work. Something the Black Templars did during the War of the Beast shocked me while I was listening to it on my drive home from work one day. A massive crusade of what was basically a citizen levy is sent against the Orc attack moon situated above Terra, but upon landing they are all but crushed by what are more or less steel mountains, grinding the thousands of people to a massive tidal wave of blood and guts. This washes across the surface of the attack moon, pushing Hass, an arbitrator who accompanied the crusade, down into the attack moon, where she is captured by the Orcs and put in cells alongside a bunch of Longshanks, who are basically an approved strain of Abhumans. They're tall, lanky people essentially. When Black Templars arrive to rescue any living humans from the ill-fated crusade, the Longshanks throw themselves at their rescuers, weeping with relief and happiness. Unfortunately for the Longshanks, after having endured so much from their Orc captives, including seeing their friends being eaten, these Black Templars lived up to their chapter's zealous nature, turning their bolters on the Longshanks, much to the Abhumans' dismay. They were so ruthless and thorough in their murder that the only remaining evidence of the Longshanks was the gory chunks and viscera which caked the walls and ceiling and Hass herself. But, as the Black Templars say, suffer not the unclean to live. Now, it's probably no surprise to many of you that the Knights of Blood have made their way into this video, and if it wasn't for their last daring effort in defiance of Khorne's demonic legions during the devastation of Baal, their despicable to Chad meter would still be firmly in the red. The Knights of Blood epitomise the very worst traits of the Blood Angel's shameful red thirst, to the point where even the High Lords of Terra were aware of their dining habits of feasting on their allies, and so declared them renegades. I even remember when listening to the devastation of Baal, the Knights of Blood chapter master, Centaur Jewel, had engaged a guide for he and Gabriel Seth of the Flesh Terrors. Once they're at the end of their journey, Centaur just turns around and savagely murders the guide, much to the disgust of Seth. With a view that humankind are little better than cattle, I'm sure there are plenty of loyalist forces that are glad the Knights of Blood aren't a chapter anymore. I hope you've enjoyed this fun little video. If you have, please consider leaving a like, as it helps spread the content to more people, which really helps us grow and receive more views. And leave a comment with your thoughts. It's great having a chin wag with you lot. Lastly, if you're in Australia or New Zealand and you're keen to save up to 21% on Games Workshop products and hobby supplies, head over to Gap Games using the link in the video description, as Titan Wargaming receives a percentage of purchases made using it, so it's a great way to support us while saving money yourself. I'll catch you next week, take it easy, have a good one.